So let me stop for a second, and I want you to think about your jobs. And I want you to think of when you were recruited. I want you to think of your interview process that you went through. I want you to think of how it is that you actually landed up doing what it is today. And one of the hard questions I have to ask for you, and I've got a second one coming for you just now, is how many of you, if you're really honest, are in the zone? How many of you are actually living the dream in what you're doing and how you're doing it? And this is the challenge. When we grow up and we go through university and we go through our various educational experiences, we're told that we can live the dream. And the reality is life happens. We have to get a job. We have to pay the mortgage. We have one or two weak moments. We fall in love. We have further weak moments and we actually say, I do. And then we have even more weak moments, and now we have to send them to school. And so this places an enormous burden on us as individuals to bring in the bucks. And this tension between trying to find our passion and bringing in the bucks is quite an interesting tension in the modern landscape. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about that later. But what I'd like to ask you is another harder question as you're thinking about your life and the meaning behind it. And hopefully I haven't stirred things up too much. But one of the hard questions I want to ask you is this. When you got up this morning and you thought about your day and you thought about what was needed and you thought about the fact that, in fact, you were going to have this awesome experience at 10 o'clock this morning, and then you looked at everything else that needs to be done, in all of your thinking as you planned the day, how many of you got up this morning with an explicit plan to fail? How many of you got up this morning to say, you know what? Today is going to be the day that I really stuff things up. I'm going to do such an incredible job at stuffing things up. I think I'm going to hit the headlines. Now, this is a rather strange question to ask. I know you're sitting there and thinking this is rather weird, but let me change the question slightly. And the question goes like this. How many of you arrived at work and in the last week have experienced someone who appears to have got up that morning to stuff things up? How many of you have experienced the coworker that seems to make stuffing things up a habit? In fact, it seems to be their career. And the reality is we have to look at these individuals and ask ourselves, how did you make it in? How did you actually get into the organization? Because all you seem to do is to make life difficult. If I correlate the two questions I've asked you, the simple thing is this. None of us get up in the morning to stuff things up. On the contrary, we have a deep desire to succeed in everything that we're doing and how we're doing it. Our challenge is we do stuff things up. So the question is, why? Why do we do that? And that's exactly what I'd like to be sharing with you, because the modern economy wants to hire people that actually enjoy, are engaged, appreciate, find some meaning, can earn enough money in that process, and in that process discover something that they are deeply, deeply engaged with. More importantly, we don't want to feel that we failed. More importantly, we feel that we are valued and that we are important to other people. So, what's our challenge? Let's have a quick look at this little screen here on this space. So our challenge, and I'm just going to share that again, our challenge that we're facing at the moment, and Dilbert captures this rather beautifully, is it says here, I hired people who have different perspectives so we could enjoy the benefits of thought diversity. But they disagree with everything I say, so I assume they're all idiots. Am I right? And this epitomizes exactly the tension that we're facing in our working space at the moment. We've evolved from an industrial economy which really employs people to get a simple job done. The challenge with the information age is that economy has now changed, and that requires a level of sophisticated behaviors. It requires us to think. It requires us to question. It requires us to collaborate. All of these are very sophisticated behaviors. But the challenge is if we remain in a recruiting mindset that is recruiting for an industrial type approach, which is please keep quiet, get the job done, tick the following list, sign the following things, and make sure you've met all your KPIs, we are not going to find the sophisticated behaviors. Sophisticated behaviors arise from a completely different source. They do not require from a job-focused approach. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is what I believe is the new key to modern recruitment. And in order to recruit for the new world of work, which is really asking for these sophisticated behaviors, is around aligning expectation between all parties. So in other words, what I'm suggesting and going to be showing you today is a framework for alignment of expectation. I want you to think for a second of your own relationships. It could be your wife, it could be that significant person, it could be even be your children. If we look at happiness in relationship, we'll look at happiness comes from expectation being met on both parts. What you expect from your spouse, they deliver. What the spouse expects from you, you deliver. As long as you keep delivering on those expectations, everyone seems happy. What is quite interesting is when those expectations are not met. There's a lot of tension and a lot of frustration in that particular space. So what I'm going to be showing you today is that in order to get sophisticated behaviors, in order for us to connect, in order for us to actually be able to do what is required in the modern economy, we have to relate. We have to understand where each of us are coming from, and we have to align those expectations. So what I want to just go through very quickly is what I believe to be the business's expectations. So if we're going to align our expectations, what are we going to be looking at? So I believe that businesses require two simple things. So their first expectation, and it's very legitimate, is we need someone to get the job done consistently well. In other words, we are hoping that you're not going to stuff things up. We're hoping that you're going to get the job done, and you're going to get the job done well and consistently well, and that you're not going to have too many bad days. The second thing, which is a little bit more subtle, and a lot of people are not sure exactly how to negotiate this, is we're looking for someone who fits our way of working. We could call this culture, we could call it style, we could call it leadership, we could call it all sorts of different things, but the reality is, do you fit in what we're doing and how we're doing it? Now, both of these are quite easy to identify if you are doing a simple industrial job. Simple KPIs that are measured, tick, tick, tick. There's the measurement of performance. Do you fit in? Well, have you burnt anything? Have you insulted anyone? No, you haven't, so you fit in on a very, very simple level. But the reality is, how do you measure these? How do you involve these? How do you integrate these in sophisticated behaviors? So let's pause for a second and let's look at what employees are looking for in their jobs. I believe they're looking for three things, and a lot of this comes from Dan Pink's work, beautiful book called Drive, The Secret Truth About What Motivates Us. And he talks about three fundamental human desires. Doesn't matter what your age is, doesn't matter what your experience is, we want these three things. So the first thing the modern employee is looking for is autonomy and the need to be trusted to do something. This is not a function of personality, this is a function of our humanity. In other words, each human being, each employee wants to be left alone to get something done. The second thing is they really want to be good at something. We want to know that we have talent. We want to know that we can take that talent and become great. This is where schools have not done us a huge favor. They've led us to believe that some of us are more talented than others. And this has created a bit of a tension in the workspace because a lot of people do jobs because they don't think that they're actually good at something, but they need the cash. So they sign up for jobs that they're not interested in, are not motivated by, and therefore cannot become really great at it, which kind of perpetuates the stereotype that they're not talented. But the reality is, inside each of us is how we can build on our autonomy by becoming really great at what we do. The third thing, which is quite interesting, is that we feel that we need to make a difference. In other words, if we've worked really hard on something that we love doing, but we believe that we haven't brought an impact to someone, or no one else notices, it's enormously frustrating. So think for a second of your jobs, and I'm going to ask you three questions based on this. What are you trusted for in your business? Who leaves you alone? Who genuinely understands that what you do, you can be trusted to do? Second, in that particular area of trust, how good are you really at what you do? Are you growing? Are you developing? Do you feel that you've attained a level of mastery in that expertise? And third, do you believe that in the last 48 hours that what you have crafted, what you have mastered, what you have been trusted to do you think anyone's noticed? Do you think they actually care? Do you think you've made a difference to the right people? And if you've had 3 no's, then you'll have what I call frustration. And frustration creates a negative emotion. And negative emotion affects the way you work, affects the way you relate, and affects the way that you can collaborate. In other words, it affects whether you can develop the sophisticated relationships that are required in the modern economy. If, of course, it's not about autonomy, mastering, and belonging, and it's just about KPIs, that's fine. I don't really care how you feel about the situation. Just get the job done. But if I need you to think and collaborate, if I'm not experiencing autonomy, mastery, and belonging, I can't play that game. So how do we match these two? How do we connect what employees actually require together with what people require? And that's why I believe actually what it is that we need to think differently about how we recruit. And what we've got to do is we have to match the expectations of the individual with that of the employee. So how do we do that? I believe there are 5 keys. The first key that we have to begin to understand about people is intrinsic motivation. So this is the first key to developing sophisticated behaviors. Now, what is interesting is when you're doing something that you love and are motivated by, you are basically happy. So if we go back a step and we think about this, and I want to think of your day, I want you to think for a second of what you start with, not what you feel you have to start with, what you'd prefer to start with. Some of you might like silence. Some of you might like planning your day. Some of you might like starting work immediately. In other words, you've got your lists, you've got to get through these lists, and that's how you find your energy. Some of you like wandering around and checking in with the tribe. How are you? What's happening? How are we doing? Where are we going? Tell me about last night. Each one of the ways that you like to start your day reveals what you love doing. That's where you get your energy. And it's quite interesting. If you're a people person and you enjoy checking in with the tribe, when you find that tribe member who values that check-in, who gives you a smile, who you start a conversation with, you immediately feel happy. Now, what is fascinating about the neuroscience of happiness is happiness produces 2 things: generosity and heightened intelligence. That's the most significant aspect of happiness, is not only are we more generous, more giving, more willing to help, but we also optimize our intelligence in what we need to do. Now, if we have got people doing jobs they do not love and have to do, we are sacrificing 2 things: generosity and intelligence. And we're seeing this. If we put pressure on an individual on a job they do not love, we are going to see frustration, irritation, and procrastination. If you take myself for an example, it shouldn't surprise you, but I like talking. Really, really like talking. And so if you give me an opportunity to talk, I'll take it. In fact, when I'm talking and I can see people's responses and I feel like I've done a really, really great job, then I go, that was an awesome day. That was fantastic. So what don't I like doing? Well, it's very easy. Admin. I hate admin. I hate ticking off lists. I hate writing things down. I hate doing reports. Can I? Yes, I can. But please understand that when I'm doing that, someone's going to have to micromanage me. They're going to have to check up on me. VPA himself had to check up on me a couple of times to make sure that we're all sorted, we've got things in line, and it actually works within that space. That is not necessarily a natural habit for me. That is not something I naturally enjoy. So I tend to procrastinate on that. Now, this is quite important because wherever I procrastinate, you will need to manage me. In other words, the evolution of managers in an organization has been to babysit people doing things they don't love. If you get somebody engaged, self-engaged by the work they do, they require considerably less management and respond better to directionality. In other words, the modern skill of modern management is saying that we need to direct and channel people as opposed to manage them. That is only possible if we have engaged people in doing stuff that they love. Now, the big question I get around this is how much of what you need to be doing each day should be stuff that you love. And the experience has shown me that basically it's a figure of around 70%. In other words, 2/3 of what you're doing every day needs to feed you. 1/3 you can deal with and manage. And of that third, there needs to be a very small amount of what you do that actually you hate, because that is going to distract you from what it is that you love. So the first point that I'd like to put into this space is that we have to stop for a second and ask this question, whether it's in an interview, whether it's in a conversation, is simply stop, look at people in the face and say, do you actually like this job? What part of this job do you like doing? I'm not sure how many of us actually ask that question in an interview and actually listen carefully to the answer, but it's absolutely critical. The final point about intrinsic motivation is that what we have found out is that you cannot become excellent unless you want to. In other words, you can become very good at something just through natural habit and being forced to do it, but you cannot be at the top of your game unless you're motivated by what you do. It's a simple cause and effect. If I do what I love and I get happy, I'll do what I love again so that I can get happy. And it goes round and round and round. So if you take me, for example, my evolution as a career is that the reason I've taken the route that I have is that I've intentionally tried to design a way of working for myself that feeds what I love doing. There are two main things I love doing: talking, as I've shared with you, and I love chaos. I love traveling. I love moving, and I love shifting. And what is interesting for me is that that now represents as much as 80 to 90% of every day. So people say, Simon, you're really happy. I go, yes, I am. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it's perfect or it's nirvana, because I still have to deal with stuff in my life I don't naturally get drawn to. But the reality is that I found myself getting better and better. For the first time in my life, I found myself getting better at what I do, and I don't get the feedback I used to in the first 30 years of my life is, what's wrong now? Simon, can you change this? Can you sit still? Can you do this, this, and this? Which is basically negative feedback. And if I'm honest with you, led to me being probably retrenched twice and fired once. And that is the reality of my journey. And that's why I sat down and I said, this is not working. Where do I need to start again? And this is where I discovered this concept of intrinsic motivation. The second factor, I wanted to share this quote. It's a very powerful quote, Henry Thoreau, and I love it. It epitomizes exactly what you've been saying. How many of us, when we look at somebody and we want them to join our team, pay attention to why they are motivated to join? Because the reality is, I can tell you right now, if you have an individual in applying for a job, looking to be part of your team, who is more concerned with the package than what the job entails, we've got a problem. Point number 2, emotional intelligence. And this is very simply, how well do you work with people in situations that do not suit you? Now, this seems contrary to what I've said in the first part. In the first part, intrinsic motivation is about getting what you want. Now, emotional intelligence is how we deal in situations when we don't get what we want. This is absolutely critical, because the reality is many situations we encounter on a daily basis, whether it's my task or human beings that I encounter or situations that are foreign to me, will require me to function in a way where it's not about me getting what I want. It's not about happiness. It's about managing your reactivities to a situation that doesn't make you comfortable. So what I found with people who are really good at what they do is they have this natural resilience. They have this natural ability to cope with strange people, strange situations, strange work. And in fact, more importantly, in situations that could theoretically threaten them. And this is the most important aspect, because what we found with human behavior is that certain behaviors are natural to some people, and to others, they could be perceived as a threat. Let me give you an example. To one person, challenging the status quo is natural. They're prepared to speak up, In fact, this is the person who doesn't even put their hand up at any of the staff meetings, is the person who takes charge of the staff meeting and is happy to speak on behalf of absolutely everyone without an invitation. Now, sitting in that same meeting can be someone else who hates conflict, literally hates conflict. They want to avoid it at all costs. Their entire life is built around moving around situations so that there is no conflict. And now they're compromised. They sit in a situation where this person is almost becoming offensive in the way they're challenging the status quo. Of course, the person who's challenging the status quo finds the person who's avoiding conflict as offensive as well, because they're sitting there and going, why are you backing down? Why have you no backbone? Why are you not prepared to stand up for what's going wrong? And so we've got a situation which requires emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the simple understanding that how you see your reality is not necessarily how others see your reality, and how are you going to behave in those circumstances. Sophisticated behaviors require an enormous amount of emotional intelligence. It's really how are you going to react and how are you going to respond. And if you want to understand how difficult this actually is, just look at Twitter or any other social media and we'll see it's a skill that very few of us seem to possess. The third fact, yes, my quotes again. I love this one by E. Cummings. And basically it supports what I've been saying, that if we're in a powerful position, we are very generous and spontaneous, but we cannot do this if we are reacting to people all the time. Third point, working knowledge. Now, please notice that I haven't put here knowledge. One of the challenges that we face in South Africa is we believe a degree gives people knowledge. Now, we both know, and I certainly know as an ex-high school teacher, that the system couldn't be further from is creating people further from the truth than we realize. The exam process is about rote learning as opposed to knowledge. It's about regurgitation. In other words, people are coming through the system at the moment with a degree, but with no working knowledge. In other words, what do you know that you can use instinctively? What is embedded within your memory? Not what you can regurgitate after cramming the night before. What is your instinctive understanding? What is your instinctive knowledge? And if we're looking at what we call a high-skilled economy, we need individuals who know what they're talking about. In other words, they are experts, to use a better term. These are individuals who can understand the situation, the data, the knowledge, and basically have it in their minds. This is the challenge that we're facing. And I tell you what what I believe the main challenge is that with Google and instant access to knowledge, we believe we don't need to know anything more. We just need a device and we can access the internet and we can find that knowledge. The challenge is that takes time, and instinctive knowledge will beat any other tool because we can connect pieces of knowledge. And this leads me to the third point. This concept, building on the first point, the investment in knowledge. In other words, what we're looking in the modern recruiting process is we're trying to find people who have invested in their knowledge, not got a degree, not got a degree, not got education, but have invested in what they know. How have they built it into who they are? How have they extrapolated? How does it show in what they do every day? And this leads to the fourth point, which is experience. Now, one of the challenges we face in the recruitment space is we believe number of years is equitable to experience. Unfortunately, this couldn't be furthest from the truth. I know personality types that can live in a job for 10 years doing the same thing over and over again and basically have gained very, very little experience other than in one type of processing. Now, if that's okay, and that's the single type of processing that you require, that's great. But in a sophisticated economy, you have to apply knowledge into diverse circumstances, and many of those circumstances you are likely to have not seen before. So what I'm finding is experience, or the new definition of experience is understanding nuance. And nuance is, how do you apply knowledge in different ways? How do you connect different pieces of knowledge? How do you apply knowledge in this circumstance, but apply a different type of knowledge in another type of circumstance? Can you see the wood for the trees, or are you stuck in what you have been taught? And this is absolutely critical in a knowledge economy and absolutely critical in a sophisticated working space. If you cannot adapt, develop, grow, apply, shift, listen, collaborate around what you know is practically useless, unless, of course, it's in an old style working environment, as I say, which is fairly linear. Love this one. It says knowledge is of no value unless it is put into practice. And one of the hardest things we've got in the recruiting process is how to measure both what they know as well as how they have applied it, and to see whether they have the right level of nuance in what we're doing. Now, I have to say this: if we can get this right, we can begin to understand that there can be a 25-year-old that can do the job better than a 35-year-old simply because of their ability to apply knowledge in a sophisticated way. The last thing that I want to talk about is a concept called mindset. This is what we have to measure. Mindset is essentially what people choose to believe about their reality, and mindset has a huge effect on how they respond to situations. So one of the challenges that we face in South Africa is a mindset that certain individuals have talent. I was talking about that earlier. So what that means basically is, through the schooling system, this person will rise to the top because they have certain types of talents. So one of the mindsets people can have is what I call an employee mindset. An employee mindset means I'm destined to just do a job. I'm destined to just get something done. If we're working in a sophisticated economy that is saying we want each person to empower their own decisions, empower their leadership, step up, take responsibility for their actions, all this wonderful stuff. If you've got an employee mindset, I promise you right now, what I've just shared with you in terms of the desire on behaviors, not going to happen. Really not going to happen. So what is absolutely critical is the development, the identification, and the understanding of what contributes to someone's mindset. Now, each of these things are absolutely critical to the concept. And here's a lovely quote by Robin Sharma that talks exactly about that. Leadership is a mindset, and we must stop being a victim, and we need to demonstrate leadership. In other words, what we're looking for is the development of a leadership type mindset. But that is not propaganda, that's not marketing. It's actually having to work with the individual to see what they do and how they do it. And again, this is a major challenge, because we've got a whole lot of people in our current workforce who are actually looking for jobs, who have been trained in an employee mindset, who've been trained in a habitual process of getting jobs done defined by KPIs. Suddenly they're moving into a more sophisticated space and they can't adapt because of literally bad habits. Enter the millennial workforce, and the millennials have a natural adaptability. Why? Is because all millennials are trying to do is to exert the right to express their individuality. They cannot understand why you should not be happy at work. Their challenge is understanding the development of something called muscle or experience. Just because they know, just because they feel liberated as individuals, does not mean they have the experience or muscle that is required to do it. But the reality is, in the sophisticated space, they are out competing the older workforce simply on those factors. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to put these factors together into what I call the talent code. Talent code is a little model that I've developed that shows how these factors fit together. The first thing is what I call fit. Do your motivational drives fit the job? Second, what is your EQ? How are you responding to situations? How do you react? How do you choose to understand who you are in the context of situations that don't feed who you are? They might even be offensive to who you are. The third thing is, what's your knowledge? How much do you know? And what's your experience? All of these four factors, together with mindset, create the capability of an individual. But you'll notice that I've put mindset as a box around those factors, and it's intentional. It's a box because the mindset of an individual can actually limit the potential of an individual. I have found individuals, this is quite fascinating in my work with schools, is that you will have a school that's a private school, and next to it is a government school. The mindset of the private school is that we will succeed. The mindset of the government school is we're just a government school. Kids that come out of the private school walk straight into jobs with confidence. Kids from the government school seem to struggle. It's just a mindset issue. I know that I might sound that I'm simplifying the process, but I've literally noticed this. I've assessed kids who have the same genetic, or should I say, the same aspirant drives, very similar EQ, same knowledge, they're at the same matric, but where they end up has been literally limited by the mindset of the school that taught them their role in society. So if we have a look at this formula therefore can be used in the context of recruiting. Now, behavioral recruiting means that we have to now identify fit, and we have to identify EQ, and we have to identify mindset. Knowledge is fairly easy to ascertain. So if you've got a computer programmer, can you program these three languages? Nuance, you can even test with a programmer, give them a little test, give them a little bit of code, see what they can do with it. But the real challenge comes into identifying what the motivational drivers are. And the real challenge comes in identifying EQ. And the real challenge comes in identifying mindset. But these are absolutely critical. Now, the biggest challenge that we've got, though, is not so much with trying to identify these with candidates. It's trying to work out, what do you really want in the job? In other words, managed alignment is connecting basically what the business wants and what they want. So the main challenge at the moment is, if business just sits on KPIs, how do you correlate KPIs to this model? You can't. What you have to do is you have to look at your jobs, and you have to now define jobs around behaviors. In other words, you have to do your job profiling to fit this model. So in many ways, what we are looking at now is we're now looking at something called behavioral recruitment, which is simply the alignment of intrinsic behaviors of a candidate with the core behaviors of a job. Let me give you an example. So people say they're looking for a salesperson. I said, that's fantastic. What are the KPIs? Excellent. You can give the KPIs. This is the product. This is what we need to do. This is how much they must sell. This is how much they must know, etc., etc. Very easy technically to measure. But the reality is, in a behavioral context, it's completely different. For example, you get three types, broadly speaking, of salesperson. You would have heard these terminologies. You get the farmer, you get the hunter, and then you get the hybrid. The hunter is a person who loves closing, loves cash, loves sealing the deal, not very good at looking after the second stage, not very good at doing admin. You get the farmer, who's a lot slower, a lot nicer, more relational, perhaps doesn't hit the targets more often, but gets the job done. And then you get the hybrid, who seems to to blow the lights out for everyone else, who can not only close the deals, but looks after everyone, does the admin, and gives everyone a bad name. Now, the reality basically is if we look at a sales team, we have to ask ourselves a question: what core behaviors are we looking for in that salesman? What are we looking for? Are we looking for somebody who can work it out for themselves? Are we looking at somebody who's going to build relationship? Are we looking at somebody who's going to be able to negotiate, sell, influence? Are we looking at somebody who's going to do the admin? In other words, what I've seen in different industries is good salesmen all have different types of core behaviors that intrinsically suit the job. So for example, one of the best salesmen I found in Volkswagen dealership, for example, was a woman who'd been in the industry for 17 years. Why did she do well? Well, she was very relational and very admin driven. Now, the interesting thing is, over the years, she had built up a referral system and an administrative system that could hands down beat anybody. She literally could sit behind her desk and people came to her because of that process. Now, without understanding that, she could easily be misunderstood as to what actually led to her success. She could easily be headhunted by another business, and the other business can say, oh, here you've got this top VW salesman, she must come work for us. Now, that business could also not be VW. It could be a Mercedes franchise. And she now has to start again with her network. It's different types of processes, it's different systems, and she could literally collapse. There's also no awareness of the fact that it took her probably 3 to 5 years to build that network. There was no pressure in those days because it was a different type of pressure system in terms of expectation and employment. But the reality is now she moves to Mercedes-Benz, and within 6 months she's fired. Why is she fired? Because the reality is her success in the one job is not translatable into the other job. And I've seen this as well, that really, really great people get literally set up to fail because they do not understand what led to their success. And they are literally headhunted, placed into a different circumstance, and they fail within 6 months. And I'm even seeing this in new startups. So this isn't a function of age. This isn't a function of millennials. It's just a function of us not understanding what drives performance. So to conclude, and then we can ask some questions and have a look at this. Behavioral recruiting has the following proportions. We have to link the recruiting process with the intrinsic behaviors required. That takes work. It's really, really hard to stop about your jobs and start thinking, how would you define your jobs and the roles you're looking for according to the natural behaviors you're looking for? Now, you need 3 types of behaviors according to this formula. The large portion needs to be intrinsic. Let's take a manager, for example. You're looking for a manager, a team lead, okay? Let's just say this team is an underperforming team. Now, first of all, you have to identify why is the team underperforming? What are the factors that lead to performance? Because this manager must now bring the natural behaviors into that team to get this done. So what we are looking for now is we are looking for a situation where we are trying to identify what behaviors would lead to greater performance in the team. To do that, we actually have to understand the team. We have to understand the personalities of the team. We have to understand the culture of the team. We have to understand the nature of the team. Because the reality is you might need 2 types of manager. You might need now a disciplinarian. You might need somebody highly structured because everyone in the team actually is used to a laissez-faire way of working. Their personalities are fairly laissez-faire, and they've been allowed to get away with murder. So actually what you need now is an individual who's quite relational but structured. If you go too far to the extreme and you put too structured an individual, everyone gets upset, you have a minor revolt, and you've actually got more of a situation than you expected. If, of course, what you realize is that you've actually got a high-performing team, but they haven't been performing because they've been functioning as individuals, in other words, a high-capacity teams in an individual sense, but they've been functioning in silos, you will now need to find a manager that knows how to collaborate, connect, and basically break down those silos to get the team to work together. Let's take a third example. Broken trust in the team, frustration in the team. You've got to turn the team around. Now you need a different type of person. You need somebody who's quite strategic. You need somebody who's quite relational. I think you're getting the picture. But the reality is that's got nothing to do with their experience. There's nothing to do with their CV. It's got nothing to do with any of the traditional ways that we measure potential success in a job. We start with the natural behavior. And then what we have to do is we have to work out, if we get this type of person, what adapted behaviors are they going to need? So for example, if we get a highly relational, highly motivational manager, they might not be that good at structure and they might not be good at discipline. So now we have to find out in their adapted behavioral state, how much from their references, from their CVs, how good are they at managing themselves and getting things done? And then the last thing is we have to begin to understand, once we begin to know who they are, what will threaten them. In other words, the worst thing that we want to do is get the right person into the right situation who's got the right level of adaptive behavior, but they then have to report to somebody who literally will threaten them, undermine them, micromanage them, offend them, and then the next minute the manager has an issue and can't be allowed to do the job. So from that example, you can begin to see how much behavior affects our performance in what we're doing and how you're doing it, and why it's absolutely critical in my mind that in that talent formula, the behavioral components are what we need to now focus on. I'm certainly not getting rid of the CV. The CV has a valuable place, but we have to interpret it like anything else with the right lens. We have to ask the right questions. We have to connect the CV to the behaviors. So let me give you a classic example of how someone else can judge a CV. You look at the CV and you see somebody's changed jobs every 2 years. So you sit there and you go, danger sign, this person has been job hopping. Well, we don't know, do we? We have no idea. In other words, I've identified different reasons for job hopping. One is this person literally has had a run of bad luck. Two, they are individuals who get bored very, very quickly. Now, those two scenarios are completely different. And three, this is a situation where a person actually has a victim mentality and can't hold down a work. Which one is it? If we don't take a behavioral approach, if we don't use the right assessments, if we don't use the right way of measuring us, we will never know. And if we take a one-size-fits-all, we could lose the very person that we're looking for in our team, but we are not looking at them because we have no idea how to notice them. And I think this is my biggest frustration, is that when I have the ability in my consulting space to work with high-powering teams, I will begin to understand the dynamics that have led to that and how unique they are in many teams, and they are not necessarily translatable. So I think what I'm trying to say to you guys is to share with you is that over my particular journey is in conclusion these three things. People don't get up in the morning to fail. They want to be engaged. Businesses want people to be engaged. They get the benefit. But it's incredibly hard to work out how to connect those two. We are battling as it is in our own personal relationships, trying to get that right, not to mention in the workspace, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I think that's why I wanted to share this with you guys today, is ultimately what we're looking at is we're wanting to create the possibility. We're wanting to create the situation around where we can actually, we can see the wood from the trees. We can actually get this done. We can actually make it work. So from my side, I think I've said enough. Hopefully I haven't taken too much time, but that I've stimulated some thought. And this is at the point where I'm quite happy to take questions and